Hello, Internet. Welcome to episode 373 of the Assorted Calibers podcast, the second podcast. There's a little bit for everyone. I'm Weer'd, and with me tonight, she is the greatest hostess in all the world and an excellent dog mom, Erin Paulette. How you doing, Erin?
We had an incident with Tilly. I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but she got a hold of one of Mom's plushies that has sentimental value to her, and she chewed the nose right off. And so I'm trying to console my mother, and it's like, I can't blame my mom for not shutting her door because she's 86. I can't blame the dog because she's just being a dog. And so I've got all this emotion that I don't know where to put it. And I go, maybe if I find a new plushie, that'll make her feel better. I can put my energy that way. And well, it was given to her however many years ago by a charity she doesn't remember. And so that narrows it down. And I'm trying to find one. And then Mom tells me, well, even if I could find one, she doesn't want a new one. She wants the one that brought her comfort when our other dogs died. And so it's just like, okay, well, now what? Now I'm trying to source the plastic nose that was on the little wolf pup, and it's just, it's been a day of personal stress, and we all know what the weekend has been like. So the show's going to be a downer. Just letting y'all know that.
Mm-hmm. Actually, something just popped into my head, Erin, is one option you might have is if there's a thrift store that you can go to, go check it out, because that nose might be a kind of a part shelf piece. Yeah,
that's what I've been led to believe. I'm going to try and get detailed photographs and measurements of it and see if I can find it.
Yep, and then you can just swing by thrift store, find something that's close enough, and you can just, do the part swap.
Yeah, I haven't given up hope, but it was just, I got all this emotion and I got nowhere to put it, and that's frustrating. So yeah, how are you, Weer'd?
I'm doing okay. Had a bit of a crazy weekend. My daughter had another swim meet, and it was at Boston College. You know what? I'll call him out by name. And it was in a college, so it was like an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And for those that haven't done much competitive swimming, obviously, the collegiate level and up does their swimming in an Olympic-sized pool. So I think it's 50 meters long is an Olympic-sized pool, but a true Olympic-sized pool is 25 meters wide, and so you can string the lane lines the other way and do high school and down competitions on the shorter lane lengths. And so, giant pool, giant college field house, and all of that. And I ended up dropping my daughter. We drove in and I dropped my daughter off because we got there and she's like, I need to get changed and get in the pool. So I said, all right, you guys go. I'll go park the car and bring the stuff. And when I parked the car, my wife texted me and said, we brought a couple of camping chairs, really just as emotional support chairs, because we were at a small, inner city YMCA that had very, very little amenities. And so my wife's like, let's bring some folding chairs just in case there's no place to sit. And she says, bring the chairs. And I'm like, you want me to bring the chairs, or do you want me to bring the stadium chair because the bleachers are uncomfortable? No, bring the chairs. There's just a couple of bleachers that were completely packed. I didn't get a chance to see her swim at all. My wife happened to walk up on the deck at one point when she was getting into the water and saw her swimming, but that was through. But on one hand, it was kind of a big waste of our time as parents, but my daughter kicked butt. She swam really, really well. She was very proud of herself. She got best every event she was in. She beat her previous best time, and so she had a blast, and that was good. But then also we went to after we got back from that, we dropped her off, and she got to stay home alone. Oh my God, she was excited. I told her no parties, no drugs, no boys. And no playing the stock market while we were gone. And she agreed to all of those things. And she probably just watched Stranger Things the entire time. And and we went to go see comedian Bob Marley as opposed to the reggae artist Bob Marley, who would be
I thought the reggae artist was dead.
Yeah, the reggae artist is extremely dead, and so that would be a very challenging show to go to. But Bob Marley is a comedian from Portland, Maine, and so if you're the type of person who enjoys it when Weer'd puts on his thick Maine accent, you might enjoy old Bob. So you can go check out comedian Bob Marley. He's got some stuff on YouTube. He doesn't have his own YouTube channel, but either way, there's stuff out there. But it was actually, I'd seen him. I own like 6 of his albums, and I've seen it. This is the third time I've seen him live, and this was hands down the funniest I have ever heard him. It was a really, really good set. So we had a great time with that, and then it snowed. So that was my weekend.
By the way, you are correct. The specifications for an Olympic pool are 50 meters in length and 25 meters in width.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, you made it sound like you didn't recall.
I could recall exactly, but it added up right. And
yep.
Now I'm going to pretend like I knew from the start. Of course, Aaron. Why would you even doubt me? Foolish girl. All right. Well, shall we get on to the news?
Do we have to?
I mean, kind of yes.
All right.
We'll start with a light one.
Yeah, and I found this, and I still think one of you guys should get it. I mean, you don't need both kidneys. So, if you are a fan of the space western TV series Firefly, and if you aren't, you're wrong.
It's totally wrong.
You'll be very interested to hear that Vera, Jane Cobb's very favorite gun, is it's up for auction, and the current bid is $6,500, cheap at twice the price, and you should get it. Because what an amazing flex it would be. I mean, where else can you get a Callahan full-bore auto lock with customized trigger, double cartridge through gauge? Nowhere.
And the bonus part was that it was, I believe it was carried by Eddie Murphy in the movie Showtime. I actually never saw that movie.
Well, there were several of them that were made for Showtime. And that was the base one. And then for Firefly, they took one and they put on extra greebles.
Mm-hmm.
And this one comes with a certificate of authenticity that it was the one that was in the episode Our Mrs. Reynolds. It is the one that Adam Baldwin handled. So it is Vera. There are others that look like her, but that is the one.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it actually works. It hasn't been demilled.
No, I don't believe so. Though it does have a weird, that front end that kind of looks like an extended barrel with a suppressor on it. That is a fold away piece. And I'm not sure if it would work with the essentially in the configuration that Jane is carrying it in Firefly.
I mean, I wouldn't want to fire a slug down the barrel, that's for sure.
Yeah. And really, honestly, that's just the type of gun that you just want to put up on the wall of your of your gun room. And it's just it's also just cool. Like I've said this a million times. I got a chance to handle the Beretta 92 that was used in not only Lethal Weapon but also Die Hard, two of the greatest Christmas movies ever made.
Wait, it was the same gun?
Exact same gun. Yep.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep, and it was in the multitude of the series as well. I know for a fact it was the one that had it still had the laser aiming module from Lethal Weapon. It was 4, and it was the exact same gun that was used, at least for the first 2 Die Hard movies, and then the first 4 of the Lethal Weapons. Actually, did they? No, they didn't. They haven't made there was talk of them making a 5th one. They haven't made it yet. So yeah, but it's kind of neat with guns that can have that can have kind of a long movie career, just like an actor.
Huh.
So, and though again, I would be terrified because it's already $6,500, and it'll be the auction will be closed by the time you got anybody here listens to it. But I got to imagine it's only going up just a little teeny tiny bit, and I wonder if those small incremental bids are not legitimate bids, but just I'm going to put my bid in just so I can get the alerts now.
Well, I mean, the good news is that it means you don't have competition from the other listeners, and you and David can try and acquire it.
There's somebody else who's bidding on it too, and oh god, I think it was my Remington. Yeah, my Remington Mosin Nagant. My first one. I have 2. The first one I won in an auction, and oh god, I do not like that feeling. Because it keeps going up, and then also the at least the Hesney auction software has and it's pretty common, has the thing where you can't do sniping, where if a new bid throws in, it automatically adds 5 minutes to the bidding time, and so it's really a soft close. But
okay.
Yep, that's there, and now actually. I think, Aaron, can you talk about this more? Because this is one of those ones that I heard about, but I haven't really dove too deep into. I have opinions, though.
About Vera?
Florida.
Oh, okay. You need to work on your transitions, my dude.
Do I?
Yes. Okay, so we talked about this, I don't know, back in September, maybe? Yeah, September. About how there was a man who was appealing a conviction for open carry, and it was being revisited under Bruin, and the appeals court says, yes, under Bruin, the ban on open carry is unconstitutional, so we declare that the entire law is unconstitutional. And then a whole bunch of sheriffs, obviously they were pro-Second Amendment sheriffs, went, yeah, we're no longer enforcing this law. And then the Attorney General sent out a memo to basically everyone who was law enforcement in Florida, whether that was police, sheriffs, other district attorneys, saying, yeah, if we aren't going to prosecute for this. And so it was a dead law, but it was still on the books. And well, now that dead law has been removed, and what I thought was very interesting on it was that there was a waiting period, and I guess the window was so that people could appeal or contest it or something, and that didn't happen. And so the time to object to it ran out, and now the law is officially unconstitutional, and you can open carry in Florida. And the rest of the article is about, well, you can open carry, but you shouldn't open carry at people, and just because you can doesn't mean you should, and all the different places you still can't carry, and so on and so forth. So, really, it's just dotting the I and crossing the T on something that was a fait accompli back in September. So, cool.
Yeah, very, very cool. And as I have said every time talking about Florida's ban on open carry. And this will go like way back to my early days of Second Amendment activism. When I was first getting into the cause was, we had one of the places where concealed carry was illegal still was Wisconsin and Wisconsin had it written out in that concealed carry was illegal, but like many states, open carry is essentially permitless. And so you could carry, you just could not conceal it. And so long as it's open, you wouldn't need a permit, and they don't issue permits. That has since changed. But I noted that demanding people open carry in a Wisconsin winter is just as horrible as demanding people only conceal carry in the Florida heat. Is that like Florida and Texas was illegal open carry as well, are two of the worst states for mandated concealed carry, because it's one of those, like, it's hot. You're not going to want to put on lots of extra layers and things like that. And so even if you are concealing and you're one of these people that are against open carry or don't like the idea of open carry. I'm not against open carry, but I prefer to keep it concealed. But even if you are that, you should be pro open carry, because that means that if you print or if you accidentally expose or something like that, you're not facing a charge. You're just suddenly open carrying. And I think that's great. I actually had, I was trying out a new holster, and I got out of the car at my grocery store, and I was putting bags in there, and my wife goes over and goes, "Jesus Christ," and pulls my shirt down because my shirt had ridden up over the butt of my gun. And I just went, "Oh, thank you." did not realize that. And yeah, so that's one of those, like, I was in Massachusetts, that could have gotten sticky, but now that is not the case in Florida. So even if you're not an open carry person, this is still a very, very good change for you.
Well, I mean, Florida has had for a long time rules that were forgiving. The rules were forgiving towards open carry or not open carry. God, where's my brain? Accidental exposure. Mm-hmm. The idea is, okay, you're wearing a t-shirt and you stretch up to get something and the t-shirt lifts up and exposes the gun. You aren't going to get dinged by that in the moments that it happens. You are expected to go, "Oh crap," and cover yourself up. But I'm just saying there was that's already been in the law. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, we didn't need to have a cover garment either, because I scoured the laws and there was nothing in there about printing. All that matters is that you can't see it. Mm-hmm. So if there's a gun-shaped bulge under your shirt, that's okay. So it wasn't as bad as a lot of people think. I'm pretty sure it was that bad back in 1987 when we started issuing concealed carry permits, but fortunately sanity prevailed by the time I started carrying here.
And I would still argue that ambiguity in the law is nobody's friend. And even though, like, especially like you were saying, that everyone was saying, "Oh, we're not going to enforce this," and all of that. Well, good, but it's still on the books. It is, again, very similar to some of my misgivings about marijuana in this country, is that there are many, many, many states where it is legal in one form or another. But also the Supremacy Clause states that the federal government can swoop in and arrest you or charge you, or all sorts of problems with that. And of course, we've covered the many court cases that are coming through about marijuana users and gun ownership, because it is a gray area. And I would love to have that gray area be firmly in the black and white.
I think it's really just a matter of time.
It really is.
I don't remember, but the last time I checked, I want to say like 3/4 of the states had some version of marijuana being legal, be it medical or recreational. Mm-hmm. And, once it becomes all the states, dead law.
Yeah. Well, and also, as I've said before, all it takes is just one either president or Congress, really both, who just decide to, you know what, realize that this is not the political football that so many people seem to have, is that if the drug laws are taken off the statutes, everybody, if you know someone who got pinched for smoking a joint, back in the 90s, they were pinched under state law. They weren't charged by the feds. And so if the DEA suddenly just said, you know what, we're not worried about marijuana anymore, nothing changes the next day besides that weird ambiguity of, is somebody going to, are the feds going to swoop in on me? So it's really not that big of a deal. The states that it's illegal, you can't smoke marijuana in Texas right now without the DEA statute. You still can't smoke marijuana in Texas. It's still the town and state cops that are doing all the drug busts. All right. Well, I think we covered that up, and we've delayed long enough that now we have to get into the dark stuff. So, let's see, what day was this?
I want to say Saturday, but I'm not sure.
Yes, it was. It was Saturday, and a gunman went into a classroom at Brown University. I think just one, and they had, at least according to this, we are super close. So again, the following news is all going to be in that developing story category, but walked in, had, according to this, two pistols with extended magazines, and open fired on the classroom. Fortunately, only killing 2, but wounding a bunch.
9.
Yeah, 9. And so, yeah, that was scary attack, serious attack. I will note that Rhode Island has extremely strict gun control laws, not quite as bad as Massachusetts, but Connecticut and Rhode Island are kind of both on par with each other, and very similar to New Jersey as well, as far as overall level of laws that are going on. And so, and of course, also the school was a gun-free zone. A lot of good it did. And they're still looking for the killer. They have not. They have. At least as far as when we, this morning, there was talking about there was someone who was in custody, but they have released that person, and there's multiple news sources are releasing videos of the killer, or allegedly of the killer, and there's not a lot of distinguishing features about the person, at least as far as the video quality goes. So hopefully they will figure out who this person is and catch them and bring them to justice, or possibly catch them and they will shoot at the police, and the police will save us all some taxpayer money. But the time will tell. Though one thing I wanted to also bring up, and this is kind of more of a keep an eye on this for the Second Amendment politics angle. But the news is multiple sources have been reporting on this as kind of an instance, is there were 2 people that are mass shooting survivors. I put in massive quotes. Well,
one of them truly was, because she was shot in the abdomen previously. I don't remember which shooting.
That was that was the Saugus High School in Santa Clarita, California.
Okay.
And that was the very iffy, I will also add, that was the very strange shooting. It made the news specifically because the student used an alleged ghost gun. But also every report I'm seeing states that the ghost gun was a 1911 pistol. And as a general rule, those are steel framed guns, and you can buy 80% 1911s, but it's one of those that's steel milling, and so that's one of the more challenging of the do-it-yourself gun kits that you can get out there. So I'm curious on the reality behind that shooting. Though I do again put the quotes in there because she was shot and obviously not fatally. Thankfully, she survived it. And then was at Brown when this shooting went down, though she was not in the same building as the shooter. She was just on campus in her dorm room when she got word that they needed to shelter in place.
Yeah, when someone says they are a survivor of something, like specifically a survivor of a mass shooting, I would expect that at a minimum they were shot at, mm-hmm. or at least be in the room where the gunshots were fired. And so I'm blaming the press for this. I want to make this clear, not the student. But when you are in another building across campus, I don't think you can call yourself a survivor of that mass shooting. You were just in the area.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to poo-poo it. I've said multiple times I was in Boston during the Boston bombing, and that was not a fun experience at all. And the fact that essentially, it was when realized that it was very, very serious and all of that, like our boss took us in and just says, all right, everybody get out of here. Is everything that needs to get done today done? Get out of here. Just head home, and then we'll see what happens. And we had to actually, we came in late the next day because the manhunt was still going on, and police urged people to stay in their homes to help the police better ferret out the killers. But it was one of those. Yes, I was in Boston and all that, and I remember sitting in North Station waiting for my train to take me home, and just everyone's super duper crowded, and there's transit cops with MP5s wandering the platform. But I'm like, this was a bombing. If there's going to be another one here, like, what's going to happen? But that doesn't make me a survivor. I was not there on the finish line. I wasn't there dealing with the wounded and the injured and all that. It's a totally different thing.
And then there was another student who is even less of a survivor because she was in middle school next door to Parkland when the shooting happened. So she wasn't even in the building or on the high school campus. She was at the school next door. And I really feel like the press is really reaching here, searching for relevance and links. It doesn't say where she was during the Brown shooting, unless I missed it. Weird.
It doesn't say at all, but I get the feeling that it's probably also in another building. Again, Brown, it's a Ivy League school. It's large. You can be still on the same campus and be a good distance away.
And the reason that I think the press is doing this is because in one of these articles, and I don't remember which, they're talking about how the number of students who have been affected by mass shooting, and now specifically multiple mass shootings during their life, is increasing. And they frame it in a way that indicates, this number is only going to go up, and pretty soon all of your children are going to be exposed to multiple mass shootings.
I mean, if we're using this logic, they're right. But again, like I've said a million times about how the news portrays mass shootings, and they'll say, they'll talk about an event even like this one, and then say, but we've had 300 some mass shootings this year. And you'd be like, so we've had 300 events like this one at Brown? And no, that's not the case at all. It's just instances where, somebody committed suicide in a dorm room, or there was a drug deal gone wrong, at a school playground or something like that, where it was not targeting students. It was not a mass casualty event. And also just for fun, because I don't trust the press, and nor should anybody, I did look up the West Glades Middle School, and it is in fact right next door to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. They're essentially on the same plot of land. So they are, I mean, they're a distance apart. It looks like the sports fields are set up in between the two schools, but they are effectively on the exact same plot of land. So at least the statement of them being next door, I was wondering if there was just one might be like across town from the other one. But yeah, she was not even in the same school. Like if we're going to throw shade at David Hogg because he wasn't even in the same building as the shootings when he was in Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, this is a step further than that, is that she was twice removed for not even being in the same building as the shooting. But they saw an angle and they're working on it. There's political hay to be made. All right. And so we got another story here. And this one again is very late breaking. But there's a number of angles here, to cover. But, it was, on, Sunday afternoon in Los Angeles, EMS was called to the house of actor and director Rob Reiner, and he and his wife were found dead. They had been murdered, and at the time of our recording, it's looking pretty strongly that it is their son that was the killer, and he's had a long history of drug addiction and just family difficulties. And so the motive is unknown on why this happened, but it does look like that is what was going on. And I mean, first up, as a movie buff, geez, I guess I knew of some of the stuff that Rob Reiner had done. I didn't realize the full extent of it. Like that, I always keep forgetting he's the guy that did This Is Spinal Tap, because the Christopher Guest follow-up movies that are of that same mockumentary and have pretty much the same cast, were all done by Christopher Guest. And so I just assumed that they were that Christopher Guest did This Is Spinal Tap as well. But no, that was Rob Reiner who did that one. Another Christopher Guest, starring role was Princess Bride. How can we not remember that? Like, I don't think I've never met a person who doesn't like that movie. Inconceivable. You keep using that word, Aaron. And another movie that's just in the world's zeitgeist is A Few Good Men. I mean, just absolutely
your favorite movie.
I actually really do like that movie, and I go into a spitting rant about how the fact that the doctor is actually the villain. Spoiler alert, but either way.
Spoiler alert for a 30-year-old movie.
That's true. That is true. So that was Rob Reiner, and I will just say, for the political angle, I mean, obviously, if you weren't paying attention, Rob Reiner was very much anti-gun in his political views and has spoken out well above it. And I'm not going to throw too much shade at him on that, especially since if you want a couple of the local shows were playing this, and I was just floored by it, was a few weeks before or was pretty much right after Charlie Kirk had passed away. He was on a talk show being interviewed, and they asked him what he thought about that. And he overall said he was absolutely appalled that had happened. And he didn't care what your politics were. There was no reason for violence to be carried out against you. And I was really impressed by that, especially given what a political firebrand he kind of was in life. But he would stand up for someone who he ideologically totally disagreed with, but met a very unfair end. But I will just also say, one of those things that you often hear about in the Second Amendment field is the talk of gun death, and noting that somehow death by gun is different than death by other means. And I will just say with a full heart on does it make a big difference that the murder weapon appears to be a knife in this instance? case. And I would just say, I think that puts a very strong bow on how the term gun death is an absolutely pointless metric.
Oh, I've been railing against it for years.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I have said is, when you make it, when you specify gun death, it makes it sound like all the other forms of death are preferable. Gun death is bad and evil, but knife death is good and wholesome.
Mm-hmm.
And how about we just say death is bad, murder is bad?
Well, another angle is it's frequently used as a means to, just like the term for school shooting, where, you think about someone going into a classroom and trying to kill students, but sometimes it's drug dealers across the street from the school, or someone choosing to end their life in a dorm room that is considered a school shooting by the by the overall metrics. And it's kind of conflating ideas. And I think sometimes people hear the term gun death and they just kind of drop the gun part and just think death. And so if a certain place has a high gun death and a certain place has a lower gun death, well, one place is safer than the other. And that's not always the case.
And we're going to touch on this more when you interview Mr. Fodor.
Mm-hmm. But before that, I think there's another segment we need to do first.
I can't be glib about this. So, as you probably know, there was a mass shooting in Australia, and it was the victims were Jews that were celebrating the first night of Hanukkah. And so David has some understandably very strong thoughts about this.
Hi, and welcome to Gun Lovers and Other Strangers. It happened again. Then it almost happened again. In this segment, I'm going to talk about the attack in Bondi Beach, Australia, and the thwarted attack in Amsterdam, Netherlands. Hanukkah is not a major holiday in Judaism, but it is a significant one. It's one of the few Jewish holidays that celebrates a military victory. The Maccabean revolt, led by Yehuda the Hammer against Antiochus IV, king of the Seleucid Empire, had been successful. The Hellenic invaders were finally driven out of Judea. However, during the occupation, the Second Temple had been looted and converted to the worship of Zeus. The invaders had also defiled all the ritually purified oil needed for rededication. Only 1 day's worth of properly sanctified oil was found, but a miracle occurred, and it lasted for 8 days. This was the beginning of Hanukkah. Every year, Jews around the world gather to light candles, sing songs, and share foods fried in oil. Traditionally, potato pancakes called latkes, and jelly donuts called sufganiyot. Gifts may also be exchanged. Hanukkah is a holiday of joy, community, and thanks. But not this year. This year, 2 humans attacked the Jewish community of Bondi Beach, New South Wales, Australia. I will not be talking about them, partially because of the 48-hour rule, and partially because their names deserve to be forgotten. The death toll is still being determined, but the most recent numbers I've seen are 15 dead and at least 40 wounded. Among the slain are the community rabbi, a 10-year-old girl, and an 87-year-old Holocaust survivor. May their and the other victims' memories be blessings. Less than 24 hours later, in Amsterdam, Netherlands, a pro-Hamas protest erupted into violence at a Hanukkah concert. Thankfully, police response was swift and a number of protesters were arrested before they could break through into the venue. Reactions in the Jewish community to these attacks are a mixture of disbelief, sadness, outrage, and fear. For me, it was mostly grief and anger. Because of these events, I was asked to sit guard at my temple Saturday night during our Hanukkah party, just in case. Thankfully, the night was uneventful and the attendees had a good time, though slightly tempered by the tragedy on the other side of the world. Online, the usual things happened. Friends and allies spoke up against the attackers and restated their support of Israel and the Jewish people. You know who you are, and I cannot express how much it means to us in these times to know we are not alone. Others attempted to justify the attacks in relation to the war in Gaza, blamed us for the violence, or even claimed they were Mossad-organized false flag attacks to discredit Muslims. You also know who you are, and I have nothing but contempt for you. One detail about the attack in Australia I am compelled to mention. An unarmed man confronted one of the killers and disarmed him. While there's some dispute over this man's identity, nationality, and religious affiliation, to me, none of that matters. When the moment came to act, he did. At the risk of his own life, in defense of strangers, he stood up and performed a truly heroic and selfless act. I've seen some people criticize him for letting the shooter escape to rearm and harm more innocents. I do not fault him for his decision, no matter the reason. Maybe he was unfamiliar with the operation of the firearm. Maybe he remembered the lessons of Kyle Rittenhouse and Daniel Penny. Or maybe he simply could not bring himself to take a human life, even an evil one. I still honor him for his actions that day, and when I learn his name, I will honor him further. This holiday season, hold your loved ones close and give thanks men such as this valiant stranger still exist. As a final note, the attack in Australia underscored the fact we are always our own first responders. Even when law enforcement is present, there's a good possibility no one is coming to save us. So we need to be prepared to act as events warrant. As I regularly say, without the ability and willingness to apply effective defensive force, never again is just a catchy slogan. Be aware of your surroundings, be prepared, and stay safe.
Drink some wine. We're celebrating.
That old Pesach story. Angels are rejoicing because the Egyptians have just drowned in the Red Sea.
I didn't say we're rejoicing. I said we're celebrating.
And God said to the angels, "Why are you celebrating? I've just killed a multitude of my children."
You didn't finish the story. The angels respond to God. They say, God, we're celebrating. Because when the people hear what happened to the Egyptians, they'll understand your point.
Which was?
Don't
Fudge
with the Jews.
That about wraps up this segment. If you have any questions for me or suggestions for future segments, or a comment on a past segment, please post them on the Assorted Calibers Podcast Facebook or MeWe pages, and Aaron or Weer'd will make sure I see them. I'm also a contributor on the Blue Collar Prepping blog, which can be found at bluecollarprepping.blogspot.com. Finally, I'm a published author, and books with my stories can be found on Amazon under the names Brenna Bach and David Bach. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. I'm David, and this is Gun Lovers and Other Strangers.
I just gotta say, there's a lot of factors on the disarming the man. I mean, one thing was that when he did pull, I mean, first up, David's 100% right. It doesn't matter. There's certainly some people have said, "Oh, the guy was not a Jew celebrating Hanukkah, but possibly another Muslim immigrant." I don't know. Time will tell. But absolute bravery to this guy running up to the guy and wrestling the gun away from him. But then once he got the gun away from him, the guy absolutely just surrendered and held his hands up and just kind of started walking away. And it's one of those, that's a tough situation. It's colored by the fact that they're actively involved in a terrorist shoot and there's still other guys shooting. But as far as if this was just an instance where, you know, someone had broken into your house and you came down the stairs and wrestled the gun out of their hand, they're really the kind of, and they're walking away, really the threat's over. So if he had actually just blown the guy away in that instance, he might actually get a little bit of latitude due to the nature of the attack, but it's also still very much a shooting an unarmed person that's no longer an active threat to you. So
he would definitely be arrested and very likely prosecuted.
Mm-hmm. And of course, also this is another reason. I mean, we talked about this with the Russian invasion of Ukraine when they showed up and just started handing out AK-74s to anybody who could carry one. And it's one of those, like, you don't want the first time you ever handle a gun to be a time when you're going to need to fight for your life. And just even if the shotgun was chambered and the safety was off and all you needed to do is point it and pull the trigger. If you've never handled a gun before in your life and you're in that sort of situation, like that could be a very, very overwhelming situation as well. So another good reason to know guns and get some training, because there might be a time when even if you don't have a gun, you may suddenly have one in a time of need.
And again, I think this would be an excellent time to remind our listeners who really don't have any need for our services, but Operation Blazing Sword will teach people basic gun safety and functionality.
Mm-hmm.
And it will be for free.
It will be for free.
So, if you've had sex ed, if you've had driver's ed, go get some gun ed. Same principle.
Gun ed. I like that. And I'll just kind of put a little bow on David's segment. Is he, if you didn't recognize it, his little audio stinger at the end was from the movie Munich, and we absolutely knew to do that as an ACP film track. That's a heavy movie, but boy, it's a good one. Excellent cast too. So we've already hinted at this quite a bit on the talking about gun statistics and the language of gun statistics, and so we had James Fodor on talking about this in the previous episode, but there was still some more to cover. So he returned to talk about the suicide and violence numbers. So I am pleased to welcome back to the Assorted Calibers podcast, James Fodor of the Science of Everything podcast. How you doing, James?
Hi, I'm well. Thanks for having me back.
All right. So one of the subjects we just talked about, essentially the defensive gun use issue, but another thing you covered a lot was the overall view of gun violence and violence in general.
Yes. So obviously one of the perennial issues is relates to what effect does gun ownership and like the prevalence of guns, the accessibility of guns in a society have on violent crime. And this is an issue I talked about in my original podcast, and was one of the main things that I was trying to sort of get an answer to. And it turns out, like a lot of things, it's very difficult to get a clear answer here. So I might just talk briefly about some of the issues here about trying to resolve this question. So one thing that people might see are these graphs that people produce where they graph like gun ownership rates on one axis, and then like homicide rates or violent homicides or some other measure of gun crime on the like the vertical axis, and they show a positive correlation. Particularly when you compare the US to other developed countries, the US is a very clear outlier. It has much higher rates of crime and much higher rates of gun ownership than most other developed countries. You can also show positive correlations within US states. The relationship's messier there, but it is visible. But as we know in science generally, a correlation does not imply causation. So just because two things are correlated doesn't mean that one is causing the other, and there may be complex causal relationships. And so this is one of the challenges in this literature, that just showing that two things are correlated, for example, states that have higher gun rates have higher rates of violence or violent crimes, that doesn't mean that that's caused by the high gun ownership rates. And this is where the literature really breaks down, because in order to assess whether there's actually a causal relationship, you need to, there are a variety of methods that can be used, but they're all very difficult. So ideally, what you would want to do, this is the sort of gold standard in other areas of science, is to do an experiment. But it's obviously not possible to randomly allocate guns to citizens in, say, one county or one state versus another and see if crime changes. So because we can't do that, what researchers try to do is look for, natural experiments is one methodology. So this is essentially an instance where there's a relatively sudden change in gun ownership rates that's caused by, say, a change in public policy or other instance that's sort of outside the system, that's sort of unusual. A common example is sort of close to home for me. So there was a shooting in Australia in, I think it was 97, a mass shooting in Port Arthur. And that led to a massive crackdown from the Australian government and a large buyback. I think something like 20% of all the firearms in Australia were bought back and purchased by the government, and a significant increase in restrictions about gun ownership. So that's an example of what people might call a natural experiment, that there's a sudden change in gun availability and the legality. Does that have an effect on the crime? But even in instances like that, to take that example, it's difficult, because the thing is that the crime rates, like the homicide rate, did decrease after that buyback. But the problem is they were decreasing before as well. They'd been decreasing for some time. So did they accelerate the rate of decrease? Maybe the decrease would have flattened off and it helped it more. Or like, the thing is, it's very difficult to say. There are other methods people use as well. There's something called instrumental variables where you try to do like complex correlations between multiple things. But the problem is that there's no real way to validate a lot of these methods. And so it's really challenging to say much of anything about the causal relationship between gun ownership and like homicide or other types of violent crimes. A further factor is that there's no really good measure of the prevalence of gun ownership in the United States. There's no central registry or good way to track these. So people try to use different proxies. And the thing is that you can get different results depending on the measure that you're using. And that introduces additional problems.
May I just interject one of the methodologies, and I covered this a long time ago. I was shocked at it. Is they look at suicide numbers and look at the number of suicides with firearms and use that as a corollary evidence, which gets really, really dirty when how I discovered this was I was actually looking at an anti-gun infographic essentially saying that gun ownership actually increases suicide. And that's a positive feedback loop because you're using suicide to correlate gun ownership, and then you're using that number to correlate with suicide.
Yeah, well, so the suicide question is interesting because, and this is something else that I wanted to mention, that there's often a focus on gun homicides. But actually, the number of suicides by firearms in the US is significantly higher than homicides. I think it's about 50% higher or something like that, based on recent data.
It varies from year to year, and again, unfortunately, in recent few years, it's actually the number has actually gone up quite a bit, likely due to the amount of returning veterans and those sort of issues. But yeah, it's usually actually closer to 60%.
Yeah. So that's something that I think is not talked about as much as it should, because that is obviously a real concern, and suicide's a very complex phenomenon. One of the concerns about access to firearms with respect to suicides is that quite a lot of suicides are, there are ongoing problems that people have, but the actual decision to make a suicide attempt is often made with relatively little time to think about it, and then people, if they can be prevented from that attempt, they may not attempt later, or there may be a chance to help them later. And so having access to a firearm can potentially, because firearms, the percentage of suicides that are successful or that are lethal with firearms is over 80%, whereas with most other attempts, it's significantly lower. And so there's a concern that people who have more ready access to firearms may be more likely to kill themselves when they make a suicide attempt, which may increase the suicide rate in relation to instances where people have less access to firearms. Now, that's the concern. Now, whether this is actually true or not, it, again, becomes very difficult to answer, because if you look at suicide rates across countries, the US has much, much higher gun-related suicide rates than other countries. However, they have lower non-gun-related suicide rates. So in other words, it seems that there's a substitution effect, like people use guns in the US, or at least some people, for suicide because they're more available there. So the question is there an overall effect? And that seems to be difficult to answer. It seems that the US suicide rate is comparable to other high-income countries. It doesn't seem dramatically different. It's like somewhat higher than the UK, for example, where guns are much less readily available. But it's hard to say whether there's an overall effect there. Now, the point that you made about using the gun suicide rate as a proxy for gun accessibility, I think is actually interesting, because the idea here is not necessarily that greater accessibility, greater availability of guns increases the suicide rate. Although, again, that might be true, but I don't think the evidence is strong for that. However, I think that there is much stronger evidence for the claim that when the greater availability of firearms, the more likely people who attempt suicide and complete suicide are to use guns to perform it.
I think that's an absolutely valid point, and I will note a quick infographic. It may have changed. I haven't actually looked at the data recently, but here in Massachusetts, we actually have extremely strong gun laws. Gun ownership is relatively low compared to other states, and our number one suicide methodology is strangulation. Versus most other states, the number one method is indeed firearms.
Yeah, exactly. And you do see that there's quite a lot of variation across states with respect to the rates of gun ownership versus suicides buy guns. So I think that can actually be used as a proxy to track the availability of guns. But there's always an issue there when you use any proxy. But people have used all sorts of proxies, like subscriptions to firearms magazines and things like that, just because the data is not really there about like exactly how available are guns and how many people have guns. But I think that another related issue is that in addition to the fact that homicides tend to, I think, receive a lot more discussion than suicides, even though suicides are more frequent in the US by gun than homicides, there's also a tendency to focus on mass shootings. And that's understandable in the sense that they are often very shocking and particularly heinous crimes, and so that they're going to attract attention. But in my view, from the perspective of public health, public safety, what we should be focusing on is where the majority of the harm is caused. And the percentage of firearm deaths in mass shootings is something like 1%, I think. Depends exactly how you define it. But it's a tiny fraction of all gun deaths, even gun homicides, let alone the suicides. And in fact, that one of the things that is prevalent in the popular discourse is restrictions on high-capacity magazines and assault rifles and those sort of weapons. But the proportion of gun murder victims killed by those sorts of firearms is quite small. There's a large proportion where we don't know the nature of the firearm. But for those which we do, the overwhelming majority, I think it's like more than 90%, are killed by handguns. And so, again, no particular policy follows from that, but I think it's important to be aware of the facts. And then when we're thinking about what are the appropriate ways to promote safe gun ownership and restrict guns from those who might be like most at risk of misusing them, like felons, for example, we want to think about where the greatest harm is. And from my view, that's suicides and handgun use or misuse. And so from my point of view, I think that it would be helpful if there was more awareness of this and that where the public discussion was focused on where the greatest harm is, because it seems to be largely focused on issues which honestly are just not that important. Like obviously these mass shooting issues are still horrible, but the actual numbers are just much smaller. And so the other thing is these mass shooting incidents may be some of the most difficult to prevent. And there's a question about whether the sorts of, because in my podcast I talked about that there's one issue as to whether greater availability of firearms increases or whether that has an effect on violent crimes, the rate of homicides in particular. There's a second question as to whether increased gun restrictions and regulations has an effect on reducing that gun crime. And I think these two questions get muddled, but they're actually quite distinct. And one of the things that I talked about in the podcast is that I think there is some evidence that, although it's not very good evidence, but there is some evidence that greater availability of guns may slightly increase gun homicide rates. But there's really very poor evidence for any particular measures to reduce any particular gun control measures, in my opinion. And one of the reasons for that is because the availability of firearms in at least most of the US is very high, certainly in comparison to most other developed countries. And essentially what you need to think about, I think the way to think about gun control is that policymakers have ways to tinker around the edges with the availability of firearms, particularly to people who misuse them, because the vast majority of people who misuse firearms, who kill or injure people with firearms, are people who have a criminal record. And so there are ways to change the availability of firearms to those people who are most at risk of misusing them, but they're indirect. And from a policymaking point of view, you want to think about what are the levers that are most applicable to that objective, to achieving that objective, and how and what the evidence is that the measures that we implement actually sort of trickle down to have that impact. And I think that in a lot of the cases that the evidence just isn't there. And partly that's because there's already such a great availability of firearms. Many firearms that felons have, for example, are stolen or are purchased from like friends and things like that. So they're not always legally obtained, or the legality is questionable. So like, in order to have a substantial effect on the availability of guns for people who would tend to misuse them, you'd probably have to substantially reduce the overall availability of firearms. Like, for example, the Australian buyback that I mentioned. But even that, where they bought back like 20% of weapons, it's not even clear whether that had an overall effect on crime rates. So, if you could just magically disappear 90% of US firearms overnight, I think that would have an effect on gun violence. Whether that would have an effect on overall violence is less clear because people might substitute for other things. But like, you can't actually do that as a policymaker. What you have a choice is with particular initiatives or particular measures. And I think that really the debate should focus on the initiatives that are most likely to be targeted towards those who misuse firearms, and for which ideally we can get evidence of their efficacy, rather than, in my opinion, being focused on things that are most emotionally salient, like the mass shootings and things like that, which I think that because of their rarity and difficulty in using policy to, because people who do that often will die as a result anyway. So there's it's less clear that the gun control measures are going to be the ways to disincentivize that. I think mental health is probably a better strategy in many of those cases. But anyway, so I think there really is a need to better link the specific the concerns that we have about reducing violence and making guns safer with the actual debate that we have in the public sphere. And I think that currently they're quite disconnected.
No, I totally agree. And there's also an extreme ignorance in the root form of the word they are ignoring the drivers of violence, because as you said, it's very frequently in the sphere you will hear talks of gun violence, but people don't care about gun violence. They care about are people being hurt? Are people being killed and assaulted? Does it matter if the person stabbed you or shot you, or did somebody rob you at knife point versus gun point? The political or the social impact of that is minimal versus versus do I step out my front door and just go walk down the street and get completely unmolested? That is the ideal situation. And I think a lot of people ignore the driving forces and the driving factors of why violence is actually happening, and instead trying to ban their way to safety. UK and Australia are pushing, as we speak, more knife bans because they've enacted stricter gun bans, and now they're going after knives. So I think the approach is better to look at the humans rather than the hardware when it comes to actually intervening in violence.
Yeah, just a short note on that. So there is something called the weapon effect, where essentially you have guns are more likely when they're used to cause greater harm to kill than, say, knives, for example, and then knives relative to other things. The concern, though, is that, again, just because there is a greater harm done when a given weapon is used doesn't necessarily mean by itself that greater accessibility to those weapons overall increases the violence, because, again, it's not randomized. People who misuse weapons don't randomly choose their weapons. So the concern is, well, people who have more lethal intentions, or who are more reckless, or who are more intent on causing damage, are more likely to choose weapons that are more destructive. And so I think that it's not irrelevant what weapons people have available to them, but it's not determinative of all of the outcomes. And I think that the example of suicides is very clear there, because US gun suicides are far and away much higher, per person, than most other developed countries. But the non-gun suicides are much lower. And so that's a clear example where there's people are substituting from one method to another. So you have to then ask a question, well, is the substitution perfect? Like, if, hypothetically, criminals stopped using guns and started using knives, would the overall violence rate increase or decrease? That's actually hard to say, right? And that would require careful empirical work. But I agree with the point that you still have people committing violence. And so that seems to be the underlying driver. And as I mentioned, that most people who do misuse firearms in the US do have criminal records. And so another factor that I actually think is not discussed that much is that when you look at crime rates, particularly violent crimes across countries, there seems to be a significant cultural differences, because, for example, pretty much all countries in the Americas, from Canada down to Chile, all of the Americas, have systematically much higher violent crime rates than the majority of countries in Europe and East Asia. there's this sort of old world versus new world difference, which I don't know that is being very well explained. And it's so there appear to be differences between countries that are not purely due to like gun policy and things like that, because there's a wide range of gun policies like in the Americas. So I don't know the exact causes of all those, but I think that the point is that if what we're, I mean, as I said before, if we should be primarily concerned with the causes of violence and misuse of weapons, both to harm to self and harm to others, and less focused on the means by which that violence is brought about. Now, I think the means do matter. It's not irrelevant, but it's much less fundamental than the fact that people are willing to use dangerous weapons to hurt other people, and definitely do substitute to other weapons when some are not available. So I think that there is a weapon effect that's relevant, but I think that as you sort of said, people focus on gun violence and not just violence, which is sort of more directly relevant. So I think that the focus on guns has in some ways dominated the public discussion in an unhelpful way. And again, particularly when it goes to like, well, high capacity weapons or assault weapons, even though that those are only used to commit a very small proportion of gun violence. Why do those receive so much attention? Well, it's because they're involved in the more incidents that get more publicity, and they get people's emotions. But that's not always it's generally not, I think, a good basis for informing public policy.
No, I think that is great. And the argument that politics ruins everything, I think, is universal. Well, where else can people find you, James?
Yeah, so you can look at my podcast, the Science of Everything podcast. You can also look me up on YouTube if you're interested. I talk about philosophy and religion there, if that's sort of your thing. And I also have a Patreon if you'd like to support some of my work. So just James Fodor Patreon, you'll be able to find me there.
Links will all be in the show notes. Thank you so much, James.
No worries. Thanks very much.
So when people start throwing around homicide numbers, usually in relation to firearms ownership, the first thing I do is ask, do you mean just raw homicide, or do you mean murder and manslaughter? Because those are two very different legal terms. Because homicide simply means a person killed another person. So when a woman defends herself against a rapist and shoots him dead, that's homicide. When the police shoot someone who's holding people hostage, that is a homicide. But they are not murder. They are not manslaughter. They are considered justifiable homicide because you are shooting in defense of self or others. And those kinds of shootings are normally considered good unless you are so far on the anti-violence spectrum that you're, I'll jump on this grenade, that you are one of the whack jobs that basically says, in order to maintain my moral purity, I would rather be killed than harm another human being that's wanting to harm me. In which case I go, I hope you haven't had kids, because we don't need that level of stupidity in our gene pool.
I will turn around. It's something that I've kind of gone off on many instances, is that I've looked far and wide. I have been unable to find it. Actually, that's just something I should ask AI. That might be another way to just thoroughly scour the issue. But I am unaware of any country in the world where killing another person who is going to harm you or harm somebody who's an innocent party is illegal. Every nation has a carve out for self-defense. In the case of UK and to a lesser extent Australia, that carve out is very, very narrow, and there's a lot of, essentially pitfalls thrown in there. But I don't know of a single nation where you can't take somebody's life in order to save an innocent life at all. And so if you are the type of person who is saying, oh, even that shouldn't be done, but it's really kind of anti-human, because that's like humanity at its horror. It crosses all cultural barriers. So I'm with you, Aaron. That's whack job type behavior.
So I just asked ChatGPT, and the bottom line answer is there is no modern country that flatly bans killing in self-defense under all circumstances, but there are many countries that will still convict you if you could have avoided the killing, or the threat wasn't immediate, or your response exceeded strict necessity.
Thank you, Aaron. I thought so as well. I spent a lot of time digging because I'm like, there might be one or two, but yeah, as far as I know, there aren't any at all. And according to ChatGPT, there isn't one either.
Mm-hmm. I mean, again, I want to mention that ChatGPT is not infallible.
No.
We've had this conversation before, but it's a pretty good search engine, and so, take it with a grain of salt.
And it confirms a data set that I've already generated the old-fashioned way.
Yeah. So I posted a link to the conversation, and really the reason I used ChatGPT is because Weer'd said AI, and so, okay. But I posted a link here in chat, and if Weer'd thinks it's interesting, he can post it in the show notes.
Cool, and that's a permanent link?
I think so. I mean, obviously if I deleted the conversation, it wouldn't be there, but I will not delete it.
Okay.
So it will definitely exist for new listeners. In the months and years to come, it might rot, but for now, it's good enough.
Yeah, I'll just say throw that up. I'm just skimming it real quick, and that seems that's good stuff. It has breakdown by country, so yeah. Go ahead and throw that in there, Aaron. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
And I'll just say what I said last week, and also again, politics ruin everything because the data's pretty straightforward and not very controversial, but people sure want to shoehorn it and make it controversial.
And now Xander is here to explain why he can have knife things.
Welcome to Independent Thoughts with yours truly, Xander Opal. I just replaced my Gerber multi-tool that I've had for over 10 years. Alas, it was not from breaking it, but from losing it. The holster I'd gotten to replace the original had a swivel, the closure failed, and it fell out at some point, possibly while I was driving an open tractor down the road. When I replaced it, I got one almost identical. It's a Gerber Gear Multiplier 600. Though unlike the photos, the one I received has replaceable wire cutter edges in the pliers' jaws. The reason I got the same tool over again is what the old one survived being put through and the features I like. First off, I personally prefer the slide lock pliers as opposed to the unfolding pliers that Leatherman is known for. The slide lock ones I can open one-handed with a flick of my wrist, which is very convenient when I'm holding something just so in my other hand. Further, as someone who wonders what the fuss is about on the trigger pull of Weer'd's Radom, the folding style pliers handles have a pair of thin edges on either side of the gap where the jaws and blades go on the outside, making an uncomfortable grip, especially when I bear down. The knife blade and screwdrivers get a lot of use too, and have stood up to stubborn screws, as well as the former holding a decent edge. I've cut various hoses and tubing, including reinforced heater hose, stripped a lot of wire with the blade from 32 gauge bell wire up to double-aught gauge battery cable. Going back to the pliers, I've used them to tighten or loosen nuts, fittings for tubing, held steel in place that I was welding or cutting with a torch, even used it to jump the terminals of a starter. Not recommended. ACP does not recommend doing dangerous stuff, even while listening to the blooper reel. I've also used the file a fair bit now and then to take off a bit of plastic or mild steel. The serrated blade I don't have much use for, nor the bottle opener and can opener. I've also exposed the tool to cow manure, liquid fertilizer, diesel, gasoline, brake cleaner, dirt, and dust. The thing just keeps working, with a little sharpening on the blade now and then. It saved me a lot of trips to the farm shop, especially when I'm at the back end of a field or across town. After 10 years of heavy use, it's gotten a little loose in the joints, but it still locked the pliers and blades solidly and safely. To put it mildly, this tool has my enthusiastic recommendation. My other farm EDC knife is a Bear & Sons Edge. The blade is about 3 inches long, has a pocket clip and a tab for assisted opening. I think the lock type is a frame lock.
where a little tab or part of the frame needs to be pushed outwards to start it closing. It is simple and robust, though it hasn't held an edge quite like the Gerber blade did. On the other hand, I might have been more vigorous in my use of it and cut some tougher or harsher materials with it, since it is less costly to replace. There's nothing fancy about the thing, just a bare bones stainless knife that I don't mind passing off to a coworker to abuse as a box is opened up, or 60 feet of folded up plastic sheeting needs to be sliced off a roll. This one also gets exposed to a lot of nasty stuff, and as long as I don't do something truly stupid, I'll get what I consider my money's worth out of it. I also note that my EDC farm knives are at a price point and feature point where I can afford to replace them if they're ruined or lost, as long as I don't make a habit of it. They're as important to me and my job as my work boots or cold weather gear, but more durable and longer lasting than both. If I get something much more expensive, I'd be afraid to use it out of fear of ruining a major investment. While the multi-tools with replaceable driver bits are nice, for example, driver bits are far too easily lost in my working environment. Pretty knives are out of the question too. Things are going to get scratched up and defaced from rattling around with my keys, wrenches, and screwdrivers I tend to shove in my pockets. Have fun, be safe, I hope I gave you something to think about. And now, tune in next week for Oddball's segment on where I'm wrong and can do much better with the same amount of money.
So Xander made a brief reference that other people might not have picked up on, but I have a Radom P64 pistol. It's essentially a Polish copy of the Walther PPK, but one difference is that it has like a 25-pound double action trigger pull, and that's not an exaggeration. That is pretty much that's what it's at. I haven't put a trigger pull gauge on it because most don't go up that high. And yeah, we were all shooting it, and like just everyone was just gobsmacked of the, oh my God, I can't believe this trigger is so heavy. And Xander has massive, powerful farm boy hands, and he just shot it like it was a match pistol.
I just want to ask, why is the trigger pull so heavy?
The only explanation that I have heard, because it's actually it's only the double action trigger pull. It's a weird gun in the fact that the double action trigger pull is like 25 pounds, but the single action trigger pull is like 4 to 5 pounds. It's like a normal single action trigger pull. And the only explanation I've heard that made any sense is that it's a 9mm Makarov, and some of the military ammo for the various things were meant for the submachine guns, and they had harder primers. And so the idea being that if you had a light primer strike, if you pull that trigger a second time at a 25-pound trigger pull, if that doesn't make it go off, then only God can make it go off. So yeah, that's the explanation that I have heard for that. And him talking about how the multi-tools needing to be tough and hold up to things. Yeah, as a general rule, like the tools on a multi-tool or even a pocket knife is going to be the tool you're going to abuse, because if you're using a multi-tool or a pocket knife to accomplish a mechanical task, it's because you don't have access to a proper toolbox. And so you might kind of split the difference between a proper tool and what you've got at hand.
Well, I mean, I can't think of any better endorsement than to say, I used it on a farm for years. I abused the hell out of it. It took everything I gave it and came back for more. That's impressive.
And survived cow poop. That seems like a harsh environment. I don't know if it's more or less harsh than salt spray. Salt spray is pretty brutal. I've had some I've had some pocket knives and some multi-tools seize up from getting exposed to salt water. But yeah, that's that is a ringing endorsement.
So because I have it at hand and because it's relevant, I want to quote the dockmaster of Sacred Cow Shipyards, where he says, "Salt water is liquefied condensed hate. It hates metal. It hates moving things. It especially hates metal moving things."
I will also add, as someone who's almost been killed by the ocean on a couple of occasions, it also hates living things.
Oh, yeah, well, that was the next sentence. I was just trying to keep it relevant. But yeah, the next part is, most of all, it hates you personally and specifically and wants to kill and eat you.
I can confirm, as someone who has spent many a day at sea. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's you respect the ocean at all times because it wants to end you. But you know who I hope doesn't want to end me, Aaron?
I mean, I know where you're going with this, but your first thought really should be your wife and daughter.
I wonder.
But the answer you want is our listeners.
Our listeners. Yep, we're thanking you, each and every one. We really appreciate you tuning into this show, and it was a little bit of a grim one, but I hope you still enjoyed it and found it educational. But yeah, we thank you very much, but we got to give very special thanks to all our supporters on Patreon. To go to Patreon, go to patreon.com/Assorted podcast to sign up. Again, it's not a tip jar. We're not passing the hat. It's a store. You can buy stuff. You can get early release of the podcast. You can get the ACP blooper reel, the ACP film tracks, and the ACP mag dump.
Also, please remember to rate us on Apple Podcasts and Pocket Casts, subscribe to us on the platform of your choice, and share the show with your friends, both online and off.
I've got a blog. It's weerdworld.com. That's WEERD world.com. And hear me weekly on Handgun Radio on the Firearms Radio Network.
And you can get more from me at linktree/Aaron Paulette. That's linktree.ee/Aaron Paulette, all one word.
And thanks to Nate Spencer for our music.
David's a Jew, Weer'd's a Gentile, and I'm half and half, which means I have Shik's appeal. Our goyness is assorted, and so's our podcast. Good night, everyone.
Good night.